Hey guys, welcome to the X-Ring. For those of you that follow my channel know that this is going to be a departure from what I normally do, but what I'm going to do is cover the full assembly, disassembly of the Microtech out the front, like the Combat Troodon, or even like an Ultratech or an X85, something like this. And what we'll do is we'll go over each piece, part, and component, tear it down, reassemble it, and I'll lay out the parts. That way you get the proper nomenclature and everything else. I am not doing this as a representative from Microtech in any way, shape, or form. However, if I'm going to carry it out the front, for an example, I had this X85 in my pocket the other day, and I was cutting some trees down. I got some sawdust in my pocket, and it gummed up the action where it wouldn't work. I don't want to have to go through the trouble of getting a return authorization number and sending it back to Microtech, even though they'll warranty it. I would rather do that myself, kind of like learning how to tear down your own pistol to be able to clean it. I don't want to send it back to the factory for them to do that. So one of the first things you're going to need are the tools available to be able to take it apart. So Microtech is known for doing proprietary type screws. You're not going to find that bit in any hardware store. Even looking at, an X85 is very. And just so you know, this is an Ultratech. Ultratech is Microtech's #1 selling knife. And then if you have, let's say, a UTX 85, it's 85% of the size of the Ultratech, hence the name. Same for the UTX 70, it'd be like 70%. But the internal mechanisms are all the same. Let's go ahead and lay those out. Make sure you have some type of tool. There are some companies that are selling tools like this for like $25. You'll have to research and find out who sells them. I actually have a tool that's very, very hard to get that had pretty much all the bits and pieces to be able to disassemble all of their knives, but like I said, they're very, very hard to get a hold of. I think they might be introducing these in the future. I'm not sure. They really don't want you to go into the knives. It voids a warranty, but if you're not losing parts or breaking parts, I think you can service your own without any issues. Just being careful not to strip any of the screws out of the chassis or anything like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and disassemble one first. I'm going to lay all the pieces and parts out. And then what I'll do is I will disassemble a unit so you can see those parts. You'll know what we're talking about. And what I'd like to do is make this pretty much the best video out there on the internet right now with regards to how to service your Microtech out the front knife. Stay tuned. All right, gang, so here's the view of everything that you're going to be seeing in the knife. You have the actual button with a button spring that's underneath it. You will have the top cover. You have the actual chassis there. Now within the chassis, in this little pocket right here, this is the front of the knife, you will have your front lock and spring. Now I've got on here noted it's for serrated because you'll notice on that lock it has clearance for the serrated blade. If you don't have a serrated blade, you will not have that groove in there, and yours will look more solid like this. This is the rear lock and spring that goes into the chassis in that location there. Coming on down, we have the chassis screws. This piece is called the slider. And then on that slider, you will have your front leg mount. This is usually a billet piece. You'll see it just like that. And then you've got your spring, and then you have the rear leg mount. One word of caution, if you've got an older, let's say a Scarab or something like that, you might have 2 springs, but each of these will have 2 holes in it so that you can put the 2 springs on there. You have a blade stop pin that goes in that hole there for the blade itself. That's what keeps it from flying out of the chassis. You have a glass breaker and your pocket clip. So guys, these are all the parts and pieces that we'll be dealing with. Let's go ahead and disassemble it. All right guys, so we're going to take our knife here. Let's say it's not firing properly or we need to oil it or something like that. What we want to do is we want to have our tool. You also want to have some rim oil, either aerosol or the liquid drops that you can get. You can find this at Walmart or anywhere else. This is pretty much the only approved lubricant other than like brake-free CLP. Once again, it would look something like that. All oils are not the same. Some of the thicker oils, the viscosity is so thick that it will actually gum up your action. So make sure you have that. Now for reassembly, you're also going to want some red Loctite. And you don't want to use too much Loctite on that. So the first thing we want to do is, let's say the knife is not firing or whatever. I don't like to take them apart this way. It's just something I personally choose to do. But basically I relieve any tension here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove these chassis screws. Now, when you remove these screws, make sure you don't lose them. It's good to have like a magnetic bit or something, or a little tray to put them in. And so I'm going to take the last 3 remaining screws out. I didn't want to bore you guys with taking the other ones out. And I am keeping pressure on the top cover and the bottom chassis. This is very important because when you release the pressure, this button's going to fall out and there's a spring underneath there. So what I do is I go ahead and hold the button down, and then I'm slowly going to release the top cover. Now you guys might say, well, what about the glass break? You can do that afterwards. You can do it before. It doesn't matter. If you have one of these style glass breakers that doesn't require a tool or anything else, you can actually just take something, insert it, turn this, and these are usually going to be red Loctited, and you can remove it. But like I said, it does not have to be removed prior to doing this. So I'm going to hold the button down, and I'm slowly going to take the top cover off. Once I take that top cover off, let me set it to the side. Now what I'm going to do is remove this button, but I want you to see this button here with the spring. If you guys can see on this Combat Troodon, that spring, you don't want to lose it, okay? Not all of them have a hole there. Sometimes it will utilize the hole that has this slot right here in it for that spring. It just depends on the model that you have. So I'm going to go ahead and set that down. Now what we have is the slider with the front leg mount, spring, rear leg mount. We're going to take that off. Now be careful because this does have spring tension on it. So what I do is I go ahead and hold the back, and I just slowly unclick the front. You see how that works? And then that allows me to just take this off. It's just kind of draped over it. I'm going to put the slider down, and I'm going to put the front rear leg mount down. Now what I want to do is I want to show you something on how this works. That slider, guys, what it does is it actually actuates the front lock and the rear lock. So with the slider, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it so you guys can see this. As that slider goes to the rear, you guys see how it's lifting this lock right here? And then right here on the bottom part, you can see how it's depressing that. So you're not going to be able to just drop in sliders at will. Interchangeability is not the easiest with these things. So you're going to want to use existing parts. But like I said, this is just for lubrication. I'm just showing you how this stuff works. Once we remove that, now we have the blade to take out. But before we can take it out, we have to take the blade stop pin out. Okay? So what happens here is this blade is deploying. I want you guys to watch this front lock. As it gets to this point right here, it locks behind the blade, and so that's what keeps it from being able to go back into the chassis once you've locked it out. So even if you're jamming this into a 2x4 or something like that, it actually has to physically break that in order to be able to unlock. Now, the blade does not come out because the blade stop pin is in this track. So what you're going to need to do is take a pair of long nose pliers or needle nose pliers, and you're going to take that stop pin and pull it out. Now, in years past, way back in the day, they used to press fit some of those in. So if you have one of those older models, be careful because you might not be able to get that stop pin out. I can't give you any advice on that. Now I can remove the blade, and we're not quite done yet. We have this front and rear leg mount to get out. These are a pain to get out, okay? Because it's very easy. They're easy to get out. It's very easy to lose parts. So what I usually do is I'll hold the one that I'm not taking out, and then let's say I'm going to take this bottom one out. All I do is hold my hand like this. I'll cup it and then tap. I'll do this a couple times until I can see that it's starting to come out. You guys can see how it's actually raised there. Once I get it there, you got to be careful because there is a spring. You guys can see how that spring is getting ready to fly out. If you lose that spring, good luck, because then Microtech's going to know you took it apart. And now I'm going to take that apart very gently. And you guys are going to see that spring, the rear lock with the little pocket where the spring resides. And these springs right here are conical shaped. It's shaped like a cone, so you want to make sure the fat part sits inside of there. Now I have the front lock, and because this is a serrated blade, this has a groove in it. It's still going to come apart the same way. I'll tap it like that. I'll make sure I'm not losing anything. I'm holding it, and voila, got everything out in one piece. I'm going to set it down along with the spring. And you guys can see how this front lock has that groove cut in it for the serrated blade. So that's it, down to bare bones, bare minimum. Now what we want to do is we want to take some brake parts cleaner or something like that, maybe a toothbrush, and we want to get everything out of here because there's nothing else in here. You know, a lot of these chassis, you know, you do have the anodized colors, but on this is a Type 3 mil-spec hard coat, and then on top of that, this has been Cerakoted. This is actually a really rare knife. This is one that was given to me by the owner specifically. But like I said, this is not authorized by Microtech to be taking one of these apart. The top cover, I want you to see it the same way. And if you're wondering what this white residue is, it's actually a dab of white lithium grease that you can put on the spring here, and that will stop some of the spring zing. So sometimes when you fire it, if you hear, let's hear this X85. I think this might have a little bit of it. Let's listen. It's actually pretty quiet. On some of them, it'll actually make a twing noise, or it'll be like ding. And for some people, yeah, you can hear a little bit there. You can put a little bit of that grease in there and it'll stop that. So let me go ahead and wash this chassis out or spray it off with brake parts cleaner, and then we'll pick right up where we left off. All right, guys, so I've cleaned the chassis off. I used some brake parts cleaner. I also used some compressed air to blow everything out. Now what I need to do is get that front lock back into place. I don't know if you guys can see that, but I've got the little spring resting on top of the cup. And this is where things get a little dicey. You want to compress it and make sure you don't lose that spring, because you will probably not be able to find it. It's kind of like that one on your AR when you're assembling it for your front takedown. All right, so what I'm going to do is, now that everything's kind of lined up, I want to get it in this pocket, and very carefully I've got to be able to get that spring and in there simultaneously. And there it went. And you always want to check that. And so what I'm going to do is take something and just lift on it. You also want to visually inspect that it is seated in that groove, and see we've got a little bit that's not quite seated. And what you can do is just get something and just poke it in there to make sure everything's right. That's it. It's good. And then now we're going to get the rear lock in, or the bottom lock. So once again, find your pocket. You guys can see that pocket there. I'm going to lay the spring on top of that. I am going to compress it. Make sure you get it in there oriented the right direction. So in this case, most of the leverage is going to be at the rear, so the pocket is at the rear. I don't know if you guys can see that. And then I'm going to keep everything compressed and try to do this in one motion. And there it is, and I can see that it's seated. I also want to take something and check it. Yes, we are good. So we have the front and rear lock in place. What we want to do now is, I usually take some solvent or something and take the blade in this area that's really dirty, and I'm basically going to wipe anything free from this that could cause me issues. You guys can see some wear there. I'm going to take a little bit of this rim oil. I'm going to spray it on the back side of the blade, just a little bit. A little goes a long ways here. And then I'm just going to kind of spread it around so that it can get it in the tracks. At this point, I don't want to flip the chassis upside down. The chances of those locks coming out are pretty slim to none now, but you don't want to flip it over unnecessarily. Once I've got the blade in there, I'm going to put the stop pin in. Make sure you put this straight in, just like that. Everything seems to be working properly. We've got a little bit of oil in the tracks from what I just put on top of the blade. What I also want to do is get some oil on this slider area here where the slider rides on. So I'm just going to put a little there, a little here. I mean, a little goes a long ways. Make sure you have your top of your slider where your button goes in. And then what you can do is just check. Make sure everything moves freely here. So yep, all that feels great. I think we're good on that one. So here we are to the front and rear leg mount. Now I know sometimes over time what happens is one of the coils might break off of, let's say, what the rear leg mount is holding on to. If that happens, I know of some guys that have been able to pull a coil and make another loop out of it. That's not the proper way. I know Microtech will not just sell you another spring, but I know these can be sourced. But just if you see that broken, you know that's the source of your problem. What you're going to do is just hook the rear leg mount onto the back of the slider, the back being the side without the button top on it, okay? Now here's where I have to tension it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this, don't stretch it, don't overstretch it, and basically we just hook it like that. So it's hooked onto the rear and hooked onto the front. We already have oil in the track, so what we're going to do is we're just going to lay the slider in here. We really don't need to play with it much after that, okay? Because if you do, what you'll do is you'll put tension on it and you'll pop that back out. Another area to clean is your button. I don't know if you guys can see that, and that's just from sliding back and forth. So I'm going to take the spring out. I'll wipe this down with a little bit of solvent, get it nice and clean. And there she is, she's clean. I'm going to put the spring back into the button on the bottom. And guys, before you put it in there, you want to put a little bit of oil in this track right here where that button rides on, just a little. Just like that. And then on the top cover, you want to do the same thing over here because that's where that button rides, is in that channel. So now what I'm going to do is just take this, roll it, make sure I have that spring in there, make sure it gets compressed. Don't bind your spring up. Just like that. Once I have that, what I can do now if I need to, I could put some grease, some white lithium grease on that to keep it from getting the spring zing. And I'm just going to put the top cover on, and I want to keep pressure on it and hold it. I want to make sure everything moves freely, which that feels really, really good there. And then what I'll do is I'll lock the blade out. Once I lock it out, keeping pressure on the top and bottom, man, that feels like a brand new knife. So now I know I'm good to put some screws back in it, but you want to use Loctite for this. So typically you'll take a glass or a piece of metal or something like that, and you'll take one of your chassis screws. We'll use our tool, and you just want to take this and kind of drag it across the Loctite, dab off the excess, and then now I'm just going to screw it back in. Now make sure you don't use too much pressure on this, because if you strip out the bottom chassis, there is no fixing that. It's not like you're going to go in and helicoil that, not without paying big money. What I like to do is get 3 screws into the chassis, kind of alternating steps if I can, or alternating positions. So I have 3 screws in here. It's being held together under its own pressure. Now we are good to go. That works great. That's just like a brand new knife. I'll go ahead and finish that procedure, and then make sure you always use some Loctite on your glass break as well. I can go ahead and install that right now. And what I'll do is I will go ahead, line this up, screw that in. Pocket clip's good to go. I'll finish with the remaining 3 screws and I'll pick up them. All right, guys, I know that's a departure from what I normally do on the channel, but I'm trying to get off of that YouTube gun channel radar. I'm trying to put out a couple videos with regards to knives or something that has nothing to do with firearms. But that's how you would service any of the Microtech out the fronts. This is running like new again. You know, you get what you pay for. Make sure you always go through a Microtech authorized dealer, because there are a lot of Chinese clones out there, and some of them are really, really good representations, except it's not going to be 204P or LMAX or anything like that, M390. It might say it on the blade or read it on the blade, but what you're getting is, you know, 440 steel, and you're getting, you know, cast or die cast metal or some pot metal. It's not going to be like a Microtech. These are machined out of one solid piece of billet. Great, great, great knives. They are not inexpensive, but I firmly believe you get what you pay for. Guys, like, share, and subscribe. Don't be afraid to look up the channel and share it with other folks that have a knife that's just not working and they're scared to go into it or look into it. Guys, have a great week. We'll talk to you soon. Have a good one.